people still coming in. So I would like to welcome you all to this, the first stream of parallel sessions. This one is D2, from farm to value chain, scaling regenerative agriculture through collaboration, finance, and certification. We have 5 panelists today, and the structure is going to be, there's going to be brief presentations by every one of us. So that will take half an hour. Then we have 45 minutes of a discussion to then also finally leave some time for you to ask questions. I can walk around with this mic so you can ask questions. I can also try to keep an eye on the comments on YouTube, on the YouTube stream. Yeah, that's about it. So without further ado, I think we agreed that Luca would start, and enjoy the show.
Yeah, do you hear me well? Okay, nice. So thanks for coming, and very happy to be there as well. So I'll start also the introduction of the different companies. Is that working? It should be working somehow. I don't know where is the... Okay, working, very nice. So I'm Lucas from Biospheres, very nice to see you all here. Maybe before introducing Biospheres, I wanted to just give a quick word about regenerative agriculture, because the whole topic of this event is carbon farming, but I think we'll be talking a lot in the different conferences about regenerative agriculture, so I think it might be important also to just give back a little definition of what it is. So the simple definition is to be able to produce food, or at least farming production, in quantity and quality while restoring the ecosystems, the farming ecosystems and the natural ecosystems close to the farming areas. And for that, we have to restore also the natural cycles. So obviously here, as we are talking about carbon farming, we are talking a lot about the carbon cycle, but I think the point of regenerative agriculture is also to tackle, let's say, the other impact areas, so also the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and so on, and to connect the farming production with these natural ecosystem cycles to be able to, yeah, connect both environmental but also farming impacts overall. And that's what we do. That's, let's say, the simple definition. The way to do it, that really depends on the regions, that really depends on the farming context, that really depends on the country, on the machinery available, and so on. So the way to do it can be very different from a farm to another, but the principle remains always the same in regenerative agriculture. So the idea is really to have a holistic point of view on what is farming. And maybe a few words about Biosphere. So we are a French-based company with a lot of international activity. So most of our activity right now is made outside of France, a lot in Europe, but also outside of Europe, in India, in Canada, in some countries in Africa, in Latin America, and so on. And I missed the slide, yeah. And we are mostly a team of agronomists. So our job is to deploy and implement regenerative agriculture across company supply chain. So our daily job is to really work with the farmers, to train them, to make farm diagnosis, to make farming action plans, and so on. But also, we have the particularity to work with a lot of food companies, a lot of traders, of cooperatives, to develop and deploy regenerative agriculture on their supply chain. So mostly our clients are these food corporations, these food companies, but our daily job is to work with the farmers on the implementation of regenerative agriculture. And so we have, let's say, a double challenge of doing pragmatic things that are efficient and working well on the ground, but also translating the impact for these companies, which at the end of the day are looking for, yeah, reducing their environmental impact, but also increasing the resilience of their supply chain, basically. And that also makes that we are working in a lot of different type of crop productions, so from arable crop, livestock, tree crop, fruit crops, coffee, cosmetic crops as well, so very niche crops like jasmine and so on. And we are structured in 4 different areas. So I represent and I manage the department of advisory, which is basically making the whole pre-project phase. I will show you a bit the workflow that we are currently implementing. And then I have most of all my colleagues, which are field agronomists, working directly with the farmers, doing the diagnosis, action plan, training support all along the season, with colleagues right now in different countries: Hungary, Poland, Romania, Italy, Spain, India, and so on. And maybe just to show you how we support actually companies and farmers through regenerative agriculture. Actually, the first thing, and because we have the particularity of working with a lot of corporates, we are supporting these corporates on basically their strategy towards regenerative agriculture. So the first thing we do generally, that's a climatic study. One of the key points for these companies, that's to be able to increase the resilience of their supply, and a lot, and you saw the panel this morning, a lot will be challenged. A lot of their business, daily operations will be challenged or are already challenged by climate change. And to be able to assess and modelize these impacts allow also to prioritize where regenerative agriculture will be and is the most relevant to implement at first. Then, depending on where the supply chain is, we can start doing diagnosis, exploratory phase. So basically we visit some farms, we assess the challenges, what's happening on the ground, what are the practices, what's working well, what can be improved, and so on. And then from that, we can make supply improvement action plans, basically. Once we have that, and again, if the company is very aware of that, we can skip these phases. That really depends on where companies and corporates are starting. We start actually implementing the work and regenerative agriculture with the farmer, and that's phase 4 and 5, the pilot phase, where basically we start with farm diagnosis. We make action plans, we support farmers, we do a lot of trainings. We support also the stakeholders on the agronomists, the technicians, the people that are also daily with the farmers. And then we scale up practices and regenerative agriculture across several supply chains in different ways. And we worked a lot the last years on how to be efficient and how to scale regenerative agriculture among supply chains in a most efficient possible way. And maybe to finish on that and then to hand over to my colleague here, there is one key point. We talk about regenerative agriculture as also an environmental solution, but actually there is 2 main pillars of regenerative agriculture. The first one is obviously the environmental impact. So regenerative agriculture needs to be regenerative, truly. So that means it needs to be good for the climate, for the biodiversity, for the watershed, for the land in general. But at the end of the day, if we want to have like truly meaningful regenerative agriculture, we have also to look on ROI, return on investment. And return on investment for companies, corporates, that's something, but mostly return on investment for farmers. Because at the end of the day, farmers are business managers as well. If we want to have like meaningful practices on the ground, on the field, it needs also to prove its positive impact on the economics of the farm. And so we are looking on some things and some projects, some practices, some action plans that are also good for the farmer, for the local economy, and overall for the margin of the farming business. So that's this trade-off that we are pushing in all of our projects, which is not always easy to find, depending on the crop, on the region, and so on. But that's really the 2 pillars that we are working on to develop regenerative agriculture. And I will hand over to my colleagues, and very happy to continue this discussion all together. I think that's yours, Anton.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I also try to navigate the maze of the PowerPoint. I'm going to speak a bit on bio-based materials, building materials as a win-win for farmers and for the climate policy. I'm also going to pick up a bit of what was said this morning, because I think it's quite interesting, some of the points that were made. I'm the policy and financial coordinator of the Flemish Action Platform on Carbon Removal and Carbon Farming. Very long name, but mostly we want to work on a policy framework that really stimulates and incentivizes farmers and foresters to do more natural carbon storing. I think this is a bit of a big slide. You know, wood, wood, straw, hemp, flax, all materials that can be used and cultivated and grown by farmers in many ways, and we can connect them to the building industry. We don't only, like we mentioned this morning, there's a poly crisis, there's a climate crisis, there's a farming crisis, but there's also a housing crisis. And for example, for the climate strategy, we need to renovate a lot of buildings, 3 million units, for example, just in a small region like Flanders, 400,000 new units. Ideally, I think we should top them up, existing buildings, and not take up new land. but we can do that with bio-based building materials. And I think these 4 elements, I'm not going to mention them because you can read faster than I can speak. But they are very important, I think, because they show a quadruple climate advantage. We said it this morning, negative emissions are very important, but they are also very important to have reduction of emissions also. And insulation is a key element, I think. Oh, sorry, this is really confusing. But there's also an element of substitution. I mean, wood can substitute for steel, flax, and sorry. And flax and, for example, grass wool, wood fiber can can substitute for rock wool, for example. A lot of building materials now are very CO2 intensive, and we can replace them with bio-based materials. And in the end, there's also climate adaptation that is very important. Heat waves are more frequent in Europe, as we all know. They are making casualties, sometimes without us knowing or following really. And in this sense, these buildings can really save lives also. Co-benefits are very big, especially for hemp. They have a lot of extra qualities against erosion, soil compaction, a lot of good elements. And so it can be a regenerative plant that kind of feeds into the soil, but also gives back. It can be used for textile, but also for building materials. In Flanders, it's a bit policy now to steer for these bio-based materials and integrate them into buildings, and have at least 20% of the building projects in bio-based materials, or 20% of the building in bio-based materials. That there could be, just as a rough sketch, a carbon storage of 200,000 and 10,000 CO2 per year. In the Netherlands, they are usually thinking a bit bigger, and they have a building balance program where they are aiming for 1.1 million ton of carbon storage per year from 2030 on. And in this sense, there is a bit of a shift or a kind of permanent connection between agriculture and building culture coming. And you can see that there are many advantages for both agriculture producers as for the building culture, because it gives the reliability, the continuity for farmers that there will be a demand, and at the same time, it will also unburden them. We said it this morning, the complexity, the MRV is very heavy, but if farmers can just sell what they are sowing instead of having to do the whole hassle with certificates, it can be easier for them, and they can leave the hassle to the real estate developers and the construction companies that already have a lot of red tape, and it's just an extra line that they have to follow up on. And in this sense, I think this is just an important point, and I'm going to finish then because my colleagues have super interesting presentations also. I'm very happy that the PowerPoint has also stabilized. Thank you for your patience. It's very important, I think, to mention that in this time, it's also mentioned this morning, we are a very vulnerable continent dependent on gas and oil. And if we just use what we can produce ourselves, it's much better geopolitically, but also macroeconomically, by paying farmers for what we will use in our buildings, and also use less of what we have to import from very fickle and turbulent regimes that don't always have the best interests for us. Thank you.
Hello everyone, so my name is Laurette Laurent and I'm here to represent Vivesia. So it's a French farmer cooperative in France, and I will present our Regenerative program called Transition. So today we have about 600 farmers that are engaged in this result-based program. It's not stabilized anymore. And so they are evaluated on 4 key indicators that are GHG emission, the humified carbon, also the soil cover, duration, and biodiversity. So together they are producing more than 500,000 tons of grain that are valued through the transition program. And since the beginning in 2024, we have redistributed more than about 6 million euros directly to the farmers. So this is financed directly by our downstream clients, because the program is almost entirely financed by the value chain itself. So as you can imagine, as a farmer cooperative, our role is really to from one side, help farmers to transition in their practice and also try to find value for their products, but also connect the expectation of the clients to the reality of the field and the ability of the farm and the needs of our farmers. So to do so, we have about 70 technicians and experts that are working on the ground on this program. They are helping the farmers to develop their action plans. It's a whole farm approach, so we are working on all the crops in the rotation. We already done more than 150 collective meetings, and there are about 8 formation every year. So as I said, there is 4 indicators, but the program is built around 3 pillars. The first one is on low carbon. So we are challenging farmers to reduce their GHG emission. They have to stay below a threshold to access different level of premiums. As we know, fertilization play a key role in the GHG emissions. So we are supporting them to change the product they use, maybe use more inhibitors, and also to try to optimize their fertilization management. But there is also some limitation. For example, the methodology that we use, which is the French label bas carbone, do not allow us to account for fertilizers that are produced with low carbon energy, for example. So even if we want to develop these levers, it's still impossible today to account for. The second pillar is on soil health and resilience. So we have 2 indicators. The first one is the duration of soil coverage. So this one, we use remote sensing to calculate the average days that the soil is covered on the farm. And then the farmers are compared to a local benchmark. So it helped them to, like, it's interesting because they are really challenged to their very local context, pedoclimatic context. And to work on these indicators, we for sure help them to sow more cover crops, so increase the surface of cover crops, but also the type of mixture that they can use, adding legumes or species that can really improve the soil structure, which can also have an impact on the third indicator, which is the humified carbon that is returned to the soil. So we decided not to use the carbon storage indicator because, as you know, there is all the mineralization processes that enter into account, and that really depends on the climate and the soil types, which are things that farmers cannot act upon. So we decided that we would challenge them more on the humified carbon that is returned to the soil, which really depends on the farm management practices. So for example, leaving the straws in the field, or having more organic fertilizer. Here also there is some limitation because we have to always keep agronomy at the heart of the program, but some organic fertilizer really have a high emission factor that will impact negatively the first indicator on GHG emissions. So we always have to find the right balance between agronomy and the different indicators. And finally, the third pillar is on biodiversity. So for this one, when we started the program, there were no framework that was result-based for biodiversity. So we decided that we would go for environmental certification, as we still wanted to have something to challenge our farmer on. But since the start, we made more than 400 biodiversity diagnostics on our farms. And we try to move away from this certification to more adapted indicators that are really adapted to our local context. So, as I said, we place agronomy as the heart of the program, but agronomy without traceability doesn't mean anything in setting programs. So that's why we have a whole data team that is dedicated to make sure that our indicators and the results that we produce are robust and traceable, like that we have full traceability. So we have been audited, and now we are certified GHG protocol compliance. As you know, there is a lot of specific cases in agriculture, so it's not an easy task to try to have a very robust framework for each and every farm. And now we can assure that everything is compliant with the GHG protocol. And I just wanted to finish on emphasizing on one point, is that here we're going to talk a lot about very technical aspects, but if we want farmers to engage in this kind of program, we really need to put them at the center by having a whole farm approach and a strong field support with people that they already know. So that's why I think farmers' cooperative play a key role in the transition of agriculture, because they are already working with the farmer and in contact with the markets. So that's why we are replicating the program with 2 other cooperatives in France and maybe abroad. The idea is really to scale up this program to keep representing the farmers' interest on the market, and also build a national or international reference framework for Regenag. Thank you.
Yeah, it's working. I've got one slide, so hopefully it's going to be less flippy, but we will see. So hi everyone, I'm Mike Davies from Social Carbon. So we are a UK charity which manages the Social Carbon Standard. We're a certification body, so we basically write rules and requirements and methodologies which projects will comply with, get audited against, which enables them to issue environmental credits. So that could be a carbon credit. We're doing stuff on insetting and more stuff on biodiversity now. And we originated in Brazil back in the late 1990s. So our chairman developed the first carbon project in Brazil and the second ever in the world. And from that experience, we learned that really, if you want to be delivering long-term results, the projects need to be going beyond just carbon and delivering sustainable livelihoods. So it's essential really for longevity. And so our focus is exclusively on nature-based solutions. So we're supporting projects across Europe around peatland restoration, regenerative agriculture across India, reforestation, conservation in Brazil, and also North America. And really, we've taken inspiration from nature, and that nature doesn't operate in silos, and neither should certification standards. It's really difficult as a project developer to make this work and go through the pain of all the certifications. And so there needs to be a way to de-risk it for them. And so we have one central standard called the Social Carbon Standard, and then we support 3 different certification pathways. So one is offsetting, which is the conventional kind of generation of carbon credits. We have insetting, so that's when you're decarbonizing your value chain. And then there's what we call nature stewardship. So this is where, for example, carbon might not be the most suitable metric or environmental asset to finance these projects. And so then monitoring biodiversity and social impact outcomes and then financing that way. In terms of today's session, I think there's a lot of interesting insights we've gathered over our journey. And I think probably the big one for us to mention is that carbon farming, particularly regenerative agriculture or peatland restoration, is really difficult. And there's multiple factors we need to actually make this work. And we'll be touching on all these later today, and some really interesting insights from the other panel. But whether it's in India, whether it's in Europe, Brazil, all the farmers that we've interacted with, they want to protect their land, they want to do the right thing. The real thing that comes to the crux is the financial situation. So in Brazil, there's farmers who are having to cut down their forests because it's the only way they can cover their living costs at the front line of climate change. And the same with peatland restoration. It's a big thing to do, to re-wet your land. And so there needs to be the strong incentives to do so. And that requires the demand side to really be willing to pay what is needed to actually make this change, not only for the first decade, but also long term. So we don't have a situation where the transition's made and then they just revert back because they can't financially sustain it. The science is really important as well. So our key role is ensuring that projects that are going through our certification are aligned to the best practices and that the science is really robust. So you're not going to have scandals. That the carbon market has suffered from that in the past. And so it's really important to make clear that the results being showcased by the projects are actually real and they can be verified. So that's going to be essential. But there's also the balancing act of you need the scientific robustness, but you also need it to be practical. we can't be having all these requirements where it's so expensive for farmers to do so. And so that's a key role of a standard, is how do we manage that balance between scientific rigor, but then also the practicality of how do you implement on the ground, which is a key thing that we're focusing on. And also market mechanisms. So the reason why we have those 3 different pathways is offsetting has historically been one of the primary mechanisms to finance nature restoration. We've seen through various different life cycles of this market that prices for carbon changes, and so it does fluctuate the viability of projects long term. And we're starting to see now an emergence of an insetting space where corporates are prioritizing doing stuff within their supply chain to improve climate resilience. But there needs to be the flexibility, so projects can transition between those different certification pathways. And right now, a lot of the existing approaches are you go down offsetting, you're committed to offsetting. And so there needs to be that de-risking factor of giving that flexibility that as markets change, as projects change, they can transition between those different pathways to really focus on what's going to deliver the most for the landowner and the project themselves, rather than just focusing on one particular certification pathway. So I will pass on to the final speaker.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Mike. So my name is Benjamin. I'm with ClimatePal. ClimatePal is a sister organization of ICC. And if you know a little bit about the EU carbon removals, carbon farming regulation, then you know that the Commission is laying out a governance structure for this carbon removals, carbon farming system, where there are basically 3 different rules. So the EU lays out basic rules and requirements, which are then translated by certification schemes. And then the actual operators and activities are audited by certification bodies against the requirements of that scheme. So again, you have the Commission, certification schemes, and certification bodies, the auditors. And so ICC has been doing that for 15 years now under the EU Renewable Energy Directive. So ICC provides certification systems for biofuels under that Renewable Energy Directive, but then also for holistic value chains. ICC is the leading scheme under that, also recognized by the Commission, of course, but also recognized by ICAO in the context of CORSIA, the civil aviation carbon offsetting and reducing scheme. And ICC has a broad network of, I think, more than 60 certification bodies working with ICC. I think we trained more than 1,700 auditors. We have 15,000 system users worldwide, I think in more than 130 countries. So that's ICC, that is what ICC has been doing for 15 years, and now we are applying the same expertise and approach to the CRCF under the name ClimatePal, because the CRCF is, the way it's structured is very similar to the Renewable Energy Directive in terms of governance. And what's also interesting is that ICC is primarily a certification system that is based on mass balance chain of custody. So you have different elements in the value chain, and then you treat each element more or less as a black box. So what goes in must come out. That's mass balanced. And what ClimatePal does is we can also enable book and claim chain of custodies, where you book a certificate or a credit in our registry, and then you can transfer that within the registry. So ClimatePal is a CRCF-aligned certification scheme. We have prepared our system documents. We're waiting for the European Commission to open their invitation to apply for recognition. We're also looking into commodity certificates, and then also we are part of that new EU nature credits expert group to also work towards a scheme for nature credits. I just wanted to point out, if you want to know more about ICC, there's another session on Thursday morning, and if you want to know more about a pilot project in agriculture where we have been involved, there's another session in this room in this afternoon as well. Okay, going back to the value chain. So I already mentioned ICC is a kind of mass balance full value chain certification system. The way we are now aiming to integrate the CRCF claims and CRCF certificates or units into that value chain is that on the farm level, the activities would be certified by both ICC and ClimatePal. The CRCF unit for carbon farming sequestration and soil emission reductions would be booked in the ClimatePal registry as those units, and then all elements throughout that value chain can be certified by ICC towards the market and the brand owner. And that's also where the claim for the CRCF emission reduction unit or carbon sequestration unit can be made. So that provides both the physical traceability throughout the value chain, but then also the claims for the CRCF benefits on farm level. This all is based on the premise that at the end, the brand owner would like to make a claim, a greenhouse gas mitigation claim against a baseline. So at the very beginning, at the start on farm level, we would certify the mitigation against that baseline, and at the end, the brand owner or the market can make that exact claim. Now, going one step further, we have a big project which is supported by major US corn grower associations. It's labeled CropCert, where we certify commodity certificates. So again, on a farm level, or actually rather field level, we certify the bushels of corn the farmer produces, and those farmers, they also implement regenerative agriculture practices, or in the US you would call them climate smart, well, actually now it's more conservative smart because the term climate is not so on vogue anymore in the US Department of Agriculture. So it's anyway, in brief, it's CSA practices like no tillage, cover crops, and so on. So we calculate the carbon intensity of a bushel of corn and the amount of bushels of corn, and those would be booked as commodity certificates in a registry. And then further down the value chain, downstream, a biofuel producer can claim the CSA, the farm level greenhouse gas benefits within the carbon intensity of the biofuel. And in the US, there's a big tax credit called Clean Fuel Production Credit that is the key driver for this whole project. Yeah, that concludes our quick round of brief presentations. We have kind of structured the discussion into 4 different blocks, but I think it's going to be more or less a free flow. And I actually want to start going back to the farm level, maybe with the first question to Laurette. What do you think the key incentive is from a farmer's perspective? Is it more the technical support, the financial incentive, or something else?
Yeah, I think there is the answer in the question. So I think it's a bit of everything. Without technical support, you cannot implement best practices, but to implement these practices, you need also financial support. So what we see with our program after 3 years is that now we have more farmers that are willing to join the program than what the market can really deliver and cover. So we see that from a farmer perspective, as long as we are talking about farm resilience at the whole farm level, and that we are backing up with a really strong technical support, they are willing to change if the economical risk is covered. But then the whole challenge is to make sure that we have the clients in the end of the value chain that are willing to pay this premium and to cover for a resilient sourcing. Right now, what we see from the market is that clients are willing to pay for reducing their emissions, but our program is really Regenag as a whole, and so that's why we want to finance the whole resilience of the farm and not just reducing the emissions. So yeah, as I said, I think the answer is in the question. We need strong technical support, but also strong financing if we want to really engage with farmers. And it works when you do everything.
And sorry, Lucas, it's just a moment. You mentioned last night that also for the technicians, it's quite a change and the way you're training them. Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yes, so we are working with our technicians that are used to go to every farm and that work with the farmers since many years. And now we are integrating in their daily life a new thing that is Regenag, and we have to really train them and to make they will be the one that are building the action plans with the farmers. So we really need to train them, which takes a lot of time. And we're trying to professionalize this more and more, working with university that will deliver a real certificate and diploma to our technicians at the end, so they can really valorize their expertise, because since 3 years they are now taking over Regenag practices, but we really want to professionalize our technicians on the field.
Yeah, maybe if I can add on that, because I think we have a kind of a complementary point of view, because she's on the cooperative side. Mostly when we develop project at Biospheres, that's coming from the food companies most of the time. So we work at the end of the day with the cooperatives, because they have the technicians where they are present on the field and all. I think there is different ways of seeing the incentive topic. The first one is like structural incentive, meaning you pay for a carbon reduction, you pay for practices, and that's kind of a fair exchange. The problem of this positioning is that for some supply that's necessary. The problem of this positioning is that the day the company stops paying, what happens? So are the farming practices still in place, or is it completely dependent on paying a premium to the farmers? And the second way of seeing it is kind of having incentives as a sort of catalyzer, a booster. So at the beginning of programs, obviously to engage farmers in a program where they have doubts, they are not sure of this whole topic about regenerative agriculture that's coming from companies. What is it again? So basically having this incentive is a very good way to engage farmer at the beginning, but I don't think that's a very sustainable way to actually scale regenerative agriculture at term, because at the end of the day, and we mentioned it earlier, but it's very important to have technical rules that are making sense for the farmers, agronomically, technically, environmentally, but also economically, and that's the only way we will be able to scale regenerative agriculture. So this type of infrastructure is taking some time to put in place, and as you mentioned also, Laurette, that's a lot of change in the work of the farmers, that's a lot of change in the work of the technicians, of the agronomists, of the companies also, because we saw the last years the CSR teams in the company, they grew a lot, and they need more and more agronomists in-house to understand this whole topic, because agriculture is not always an easy topic to understand when we are far from the industry. So yeah, I think incentives are a way, but that should not be the main way to actually scale regenerative agriculture, even though that's absolutely necessary to have and that's the point of connecting the value chain all together, to have at the end of the day, these economic rewards for farmers to be able to engage in the programs as well. So that's both-sided answer on both. Yeah, incentives are very important, but technicity and agronomy is the core of what we can do in a regenerative agriculture project.
Both. I know that in carbon markets, people always talk about the co-benefits of the carbon project, like biodiversity first and foremost, but also then soil health, water retention, and all that could potentially then also lead to higher yields for the farmers, right? So to what extent would maybe a farmer more see the carbon as a co-benefit of the overall practice rather than the core objective of all? So what role does just the carbon payments really play for them?
I think that's an interesting question, and only in the term of co-benefit, that means that carbon is a priority, the rest is secondary. So when we talk about co-benefits, we talk about biodiversity, we talk about water, we talk about soil health, about livelihoods and so on, which in fact is a carbon-driven view, which is kind of normal because the companies are currently driven mostly by carbon. That's a reality. Huh? Even in a regenerative agriculture project, and you mentioned it, Laurette, as well, companies are first interested in the carbon reduction and then on the impact on biodiversity and so on. But biodiversity, water, livelihood, soil health must be part of the projects every time, because that's also how we build meaningful projects at the end of the day, because everything is interlinked, and you mentioned it, Mike, also. We cannot work in silos into that, and if you want to have good benefits in terms of carbon, you have to take into account the water situation, you have to take into account the biodiversity situation, you have to take into account the livelihood of the farmers, the soil health, and so on. So everything is always interconnected. And the risk of working in silos is that sometimes we focus on kind of fake solutions or short-term solutions because we focus only on carbon, when sometimes the farming challenges and the daily agricultural challenges are a bit different. And where you are in areas with a lot of droughts, water scarcity, and so on, you can apply a lot of carbon theory around that, but at the end of the day, the main limiting factor is water, and you have to find ways to work around this limiting factor to be able to, at the end, be able to store carbon, reduce emissions, and so on. So everything must be interlinked, and both on, again, the agronomic approach, technical approach, but also on the reporting approach of the company.
I think, if I may add, from our perspective, as you said, like, I totally agree, carbon is what is driving the market at the moment, but as a farmer cooperative, our mission is really to secure the farming on our territory. So if we focus only on carbon, then we miss a whole part of the picture. So that's why we are challenging our farmers on 4 different indicators and supporting them in all these different areas. So carbon is one of them, but also biodiversity, and also, as you said, like water retention that will play a key role in the next years. But to come back to your question on, like, is regenerative agriculture really increasing the yield in the end? That's not how I see it, because we need to keep in mind that we are talking about a kind of like a productive regen ag. So we are still in big farms that are having short crop rotation, and that's the system we have to work on. So we try to implement best practices, but keeping in mind that yield will always be the key element for our farmers, because it's where they have the money from. So our point of view is not that by implementing Regen Ag we will increase the yield of our farmers, but that we will secure a yield throughout the years. And I think that's how we need to see it, because when we see like the harvest from last year, which was very catastrophic, I may say, that's what we want to avoid. We want to have more stable yield across the years, but not push the yield higher, just making sure that we can keep farming on our territory in the next years.
Yeah, I think you make an interesting point, because in some way carbon is a kind of a language, a discourse that connects worlds that are not always connected or don't speak the same language, and the CO2 is a kind of intermediary language with which banks can talk to, for example, farmers. But it's interesting to see that a lot of financial players also are starting to valorize the co-benefits, because for a bank and for an insurance, climate adaptation, water retention, erosion resistance is becoming very important, as it can be a way of mitigating the risks for their own business and the business that their clients have. And in that sense, it becomes the price for CO2 plus the top of risk mitigation through water retention, through erosion measures. And in that sense, I think it becomes more powerful to start quantifying in the measure that it's possible these kind of co-benefits also towards the bank. And in this sense, we can scale the financing that is possible, because we have to make this point that was also made this morning. I mean, it's not just a problem for farmers that there's climate change. Banks and insurances are really looking at their numbers and seeing things turn into red and having to pay high premiums. And this is the risk that they are seeingly increase. And that way, the farmers are their natural partners in mitigating these risks.
Maybe speaking about banks and currencies and exchange, Mike, in your presentation, you mentioned these 3 different views or perspectives or options. Can you, since we're on the farm to value chain panel, can you maybe elaborate a bit on the insetting part and how that can serve as a financing mechanism?
Yeah, so the insetting play is more for corporates that want to do stuff directly within their supply chain. So historically, if we looked at the offsetting, it could be anywhere in the world. You could purchase a carbon credit from a regenerative agriculture project in India, even though all your operations are in Europe. And that could be done. But the challenge is that corporates want to really focus on what's going to benefit their own value chain, their supply chain. And so really focusing about what's going to, and it's also a lot easier for them to get internal approval to do so. Voluntary carbon credits right now is very much as it's in the term, voluntary thing. And so to get kind of the CFO and other aspects of the organization to approve big transactions, it can be quite challenging from an offsetting standpoint. Whereas when it's in a insetting, so a value chain standpoint, there's a really strong incentive to do so. You're improving the resiliency of your supply chain, and the money you're spending, you're not seeing it as a CSR, nice thing to do for marketing purposes. You're doing it because it's actually going to directly benefit your business long term. And so the insetting play is really, how do you quantify the impact of doing different interventions within your value chain, really tracking that impact at a commodity level output basis as well, so you can calculate the carbon intensity piece. And then tracking that and monitoring that over the time. Now, the real value of insetting is you're able to bring an entire value chain together in that process. So offsetting, you'll have one project, they'll sell carbon, and then the person that purchased that carbon will retire it, and only that organization can make that climate claim. Insetting is very different. You have a whole value chain, so you could have, for example, a cooperative, and they have their off-takers, and then all their clients as well, and the buyers can participate in that intervention and make claims associated with their Scope 3 emissions as well. So you're bringing an entire industry really together and helping to drive that systemic change. And so it makes it a far more attractive approach for corporates than from the offsetting play, because you're able to pull different levers to attract other stakeholders in your supply chain to really help try to deliver the same outcome. And ultimately, it benefits every organization within that supply chain as well, because it ultimately links back to the specific farms and improving the resilience of those farms as well.
Lucas and Lorette, how do you feel about the readiness of corporates to pay price premiums for crops based on that?
Yeah. So as we said, like, there is a demand from the market, mostly on carbon, because that's what they're challenged upon also with the banks. And as we already mentioned, we see that there is an interest that is growing. I'm not quite sure that at least the industrials that we are talking with are ready to pay for biodiversity or water mitigation yet. It's really the carbon that is driving the market. But what we see, at least, is that there is multiple different programs that are emerging through different territory, which means that there is an interest behind. And I think we need to secure that the fact that clients are investing in value chains and that they can really benefit from it, not only for securing their sourcing, but also for their reporting requirements. But I have hope that the market will grow bigger, and that this kind of program can really upscale and reach bigger proportions.
And maybe if I can add on that as well, I think there is this regulatory approach where company needs for CSRD purpose and so on to report impact, and that's mandatory basically. But we see a lot of shift in the companies to go also towards resilience. And I think that's a key point, and that's why the climate change entry point is very important, because at the end of the day, a lot of farming production will be challenged or is already challenged. We have the case today in Spain, in Italy, in south of France, in Hungary, in Romania, where crops are more and more complicated to grow. And that has a direct impact on the business of the farmers, obviously, but also of these companies. Because when you have a plant, factory, I don't know, in Hungary, for example, and that the production is going lower and lower, and you have more droughts, more water scarcity, and yields are unstable, and so on, so is your factory, and so is your business behind it. So there is really a need to connect also these whole programs, these whole farming approaches, with the reality of the business of both the farmers So that's where it's very important to calculate also the cost of the technical routes, the cost of the action plan, the level of margins, and so on. That's how we make sustainable regenerative agriculture. But also to connect it with the business of the companies and to make, again, as the incentive, the mandatory regulation a booster to go towards this topic, to ask the corporates themselves the question of, okay, where am I standing in terms of carbon, in terms of biodiversity, in terms of water? Are my supply chain at risk? Where do we have to focus, and so on? And then use this baseline as a lever also to be able to build programs and action plans that brings resilience to the farmers, but also directly to their own business. And I think, yeah, the world is also ruled by business, and we have to talk also business to the farmers, to the cooperatives, to the companies, and that needs to be also taken into account in the approach.
Then maybe for you, Mike, again, what would you say to a corporate who is hesitant to fully engage in either insetting, offsetting activities because they're still waiting for guidance from SBTi, net zero standards, or greenhouse gas protocol, or EU green claims, you name it? What would you say to them to actually get going?
Yeah, I think even when we're talking to project developers beyond just the buyers piece, it's start small and scale up. So these market mechanisms have been designed where you can scale them iteratively over time, and so start off with a pilot, learn from that process, and then scale up as there's more signals as to the market. There's no point waiting on the sideline because it takes time to get these things up and running. So it will take some projects 2 years from their initial concept to actually implementation happening on the ground and the data being collected in an efficient manner. And so if you're waiting for all that regulation to come out, you're then going to be 2 years behind everyone else that's already started the pilot, start to learn that process. And ultimately it'll get to the point where it's a competitive advantage to have these insights. So I think for most corporates that their value and what they're looking to do is start off doing some very small pilots within areas where it's less complicated, get some real insights, and then figure out how can they scale up from there and really be proactive in that approach rather than waiting for these regulations, because it feels like they are never coming, or they take a long time to land, and so they can proactively start doing stuff which is going to be beneficial for them long term as well.
Thanks. And Anton, you talked about policy design. What do you think are the key challenges that policy could help improve or get over?
Some of the stuff was already mentioned this morning, and I'm also working on this idea of a buyer's club, because I think we need a long-term commitment of companies that say, like, yeah, we are going to go the full way for a long time, ideally 10 years, even though that's a very big decision for a corporate to make. But we have to also be blunt and say to corporates, yeah, there's no business on a dead planet. I mean, there is huge risks that we are taking now as humanity in the current course of things, and the risks for corporates are just as big as it is for other companies. And while they are having good, reasonable, steady flow of income, and some banks are doing very, very well lately, so we should really point that out, and that there's also a responsibility to give back to society in some aspects. And this buyers club, I think, can really, I mean, a lot of problems to counter climate change are a matter of bridging credit. It's really, people need credit first to be able to implement a solution. It's the same thing with heating pumps. It's the same thing for farmers. They need a kind of credit or a kind of pre-investment to get started. And we don't already have that money, and in that sense, it's usually seen as a problem. But when I was talking to a bank that was maybe interested in becoming part of a buyer's club, and I asked them, like, yeah, would you consider doing pre-financing or pre-investment? And they said, yeah, of course, we do it all the time. We do it already for innovation subsidies that agricultural companies file for or candidate. And they say, yeah, when we see that it's a good candidacy, we already pre-finance it so that that person can get started. So we really have to start asking directly and forming this kind of buyer's club also to de-risk a bit, maybe with some input from public authorities. And I think in that way we can deliver the bridging capital that is necessary, because in the long run we are making the measures against climate change more and more expensive. If we pre-finance now, it will be less expensive as a society than if we do it, than if we postpone it and wait until the farmers would do it out of their own movement.
And Anton, I think you have a good understanding of what farmers, especially for small-scale farmers, already have on hand, also when it comes to data, maybe, or monitoring, or also national inventories. How much is that of a challenge, and how can we overcome that?
A huge one. I'm not very good with data, but this morning I had this bit of a flash that we have to create a kind of Waze for farmers. You know, everybody, or a lot of people use Waze to navigate to a certain place, and it has to be a bit like that. It has to be intuitive and accessible. I think the project of transitions is really awesome. It's really doing pioneering work, and the idea should be that at some point we can automatize or partly automatize and have a kind of more easy, accessible way of filing and pre-filing based on your territory or ownership, on certain soil samples that you already had before. And in that sense, you can have a kind of simplified account that should make the life of the farmer easier, and its admin less, and his Sunday more free, instead of doing taxes and the admin for project development.
Yeah, maybe I can jump on that subject too, because data is at the heart of every Regenerative program. We are asking our farmers to fill in every activities that they are doing in every field. We monitor at the field level. We want to know which product they used, the amount of product they applied, all the yield, how much to every parcel. We really go into such a specific level of details that the farmers really are lost. Most of them, they don't know how to fill and use these farm management systems. So as a starter, we have people that goes on the farms and that are helping and training our farmers to properly enter and share their data in the farm management systems. Because if we don't do that, then it's the data team that is in the office that really have to do all the work of making sure that the data is robust enough. So we are acting really on the ground with the farmers to train them on how to really share their information properly and make them robust. But of course, automatizing everything is the end goal. But right now, even with remote sensing, there is a lot of limitation in what we can do. So hopefully we will move toward more monitoring with less bureaucracy. But at the moment, we really need this data to make the models functions. And so we also really need to find ways to give information back to the farmers, because right now they really see that entering all their data is just a burden because they don't see the added value of doing it. And now we are entering a new era where we try to really give information back to the farmers on their practice at the field level, how to optimize, how to reduce the cost. But it takes time because we need also to have sufficient data to be strong on the recommendation that we make. So it's an ongoing process, but I think the key, if we want to engage farmers in the long run, is to make sure that we give information back to them.
Yeah, so I agree. You mentioned it sounds like a burden, but it should not just be perceived as such. There are benefits of having all that data. Does that mean that it also goes back to better farming when you have all the data as a farmer? Does it impact the way you're farming, and then also maybe increase yields or climate resilience and so on?
I think where we can help is to find indicators that are relevant for farmers that are most of the time not the one that the clients are asking. So it's a new thinking that we need to to have to be able to really be relevant to the farmers. But I think the end goal is to reduce the cost and increase the margins, and so it will come also with the fertilizer management practices, and also maybe we are talking a lot about the cover crops and how to have good mixtures that that when you implement them, you will need less fertilizers for the next crops. So this is the kind of information that we want to give back to the farmers. But then we need to find these indicators that can help to really be a better farmers. I don't know if you have some ideas of good indicators, but it's still the beginning.
Yeah, at least the way we do it in our projects is that the first year of a project, when we onboard a farmer, it's like basically a corporate is coming to us and say, okay, I'm sourcing, I don't know, wheat in Poland in this area. There is this supplier, let's connect with him. These suppliers put us in contact with 20, 30, 40 farmers, depends on the project. And then the farmers are going to the project on a voluntary basis, basically. But the first year that we onboard a farmer, whoever the farmer is, we have to start with a farm diagnosis. So we have to gather all this information, because the farm diagnosis has for purpose to set the baseline for the corporate, obviously, but also set the baseline for us on where currently is the farm standing in terms of technical routes, what is the farmer doing, what is working well, what is working less well, what can be optimized or not, and so on. And we use primarily this data to build the action plans with the farmers. So we have to gather the fertilization plan, the pesticide plan, the tillage regime, all the crop rotation, everything that is done on the farm and at plot level, in order then to build the technical routes and the action plan that will make sense. So we also have to gather some soil analysis, not as much as when we do a carbon credit certification, but we have to understand the soil organic matter of the different plots. We have to understand the structure of the soil. So first year, the first diagnosis is very important, because that really set the baseline on where is the farm standing in terms of project, but also technically and agronomically, environmentally. And then from that, we build an action plan that is personalized for this farmer. And in the second time, we use this data to then calculate indicators that are useful for the corporates, so, which obviously are not exactly the same as the farmers, and also to switch back to co-benefits approach and beyond carbon approach. It's like, at the end of the day, when you calculate soil health indicators, compaction indicators, soil coverage, tillage intensity, and so on, that's also indicators that are talking way more to the farmers than ton of CO2 per ton of product. Because I say, yeah, I have X ton of CO2 per ton of product, do something out of it. Okay, nice, so what can I do? I can reduce the fertilizers. How do I do that? If I reduce the fertilizers, I reduce the yield, so you have to pay for it, basically. But because that's a one-sided approach, you don't directly find a solution. When you have a systemic approach, you know that by implementing some specific cover crops, by moving a bit the rotation, by reducing a bit the fertilizers on year 2, year 3, but compensating with other natural solutions and so on, you can find solutions that are beneficial for carbon, for biodiversity, for water, and so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, the data is the same. The way we translate it is two different pathways, but that's at the end okay. That's not a problem that corporates and farmers are not talking exactly the same language, because they are not living exactly in the same world either. But this data basically is the same. So that's very important in my view, and in Biosphere's view in general, to have like really these two pathways for data, and to make it as useful as possible for every stakeholder in project, and first of all for the farmer, because that is data at the beginning. So,
can I ask a short open question to all of you sitting here? Are you experimenting with AI to ease the data burden, or?
I think it's depends what you mean with AI. At the moment, we have our farmers that are using some models that help them to know when to apply which type of products. So this is kind of artificial intelligence in a way, but not in a way that it will feel the farm management system, or that it will really tell the farmers to sow this crop instead of this one. no, I think we still very much need human power and human people. Yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree on that. And AI is growing very, very fast. But right now, for agronomic purposes, that's still very kind of low level, and that you always have to adapt, and you need so much context and so on. That right now, that's anyway not ready for technical advisory purposes. For data management, there is definitely a room for improvement, and that's definitely a burden for farmers as well. Yeah, I think there is definitely room for solutions there. I don't have all of them with me right now, but
just going to say, from our standpoint, so we're seeing different monitoring, reporting, verification organizations come out all the time, and so a lot of them are developing systems to use AI to help estimate carbon removals from soil based on different activities. I think the biggest challenge we see is the quality of the data, which is training these models. There is a lot of challenges around kind of limitations with the science right now in terms of soil sampling and lab uncertainty and other aspects, which when you start training models on those, you're basically just reinforcing those errors. And so there needs to be kind of improvement of the actual source data before we can have really accurate models, because it's good as a proxy, but from our standpoint as a certification body, we wouldn't be able to certify projects and units just based on that AI model, just because there's lots of uncertainty embedded into that model, which isn't to the level we would be accepting as our standard.
Maybe looking beyond the EU data infrastructure, Mike, I believe you are also involved in cocoa projects, right? How does the MRV infrastructure and landscape look outside of the EU?
Yeah, so we're supporting some projects that are looking to do insetting on the cocoa space. The monitoring piece really does vary based on different project types. So I think for afforestation, reforestation, a satellite-based approach is far more viable, just because there is the accuracy in terms of the above-ground biomass from that satellite imagery. The biggest challenge, which I think everyone is looking at, is how do you make regenerative agriculture more scalable? And that's global as well. And so we have projects in North America and in Latin America as well. But the issue still comes back to the monitoring and the cost of monitoring. And so I think varying different project types, you're going to have more scalability, but then it's kind of a global issue around regenerative agriculture and the monitoring piece, mainly because of the challenges around how long it takes for soil organic carbon to really accumulate over time, and the frequency of which a lot of these schemes are requiring monitoring to be done. So if you're monitoring every 3 years, often the uncertainty from the lab testing outweighs any of the gains in soil carbon, which makes it very challenging. And most academia really monitors soil on a 10-year basis, but that doesn't really work for farmers, having those kind of long-term monitoring periods. So it's kind of a balancing act, which I think a lot of people are looking into, but it's kind of a global issue as well.
Yeah, maybe I just want to mention, this is one of the reasons why I'm a strong believer in these bio-based materials approach, because the MRV is now a responsibility for the owner of the building, and the interests of the owner and the developer and the contractor are aligned there. Everybody wants the building to be intact and in a good shape, and in that sense, it's quite probable that it will remain intact for 35 years, as the new methodology is proposing for the European Commission. But of course, aside from that, it's just one of the methods, and we have to improve also the carbon stock in the soil and in multiple other ways. But I think from an MRV point, it's the easiest, and it's also quite fast to apply, because hemp, flax, they have short rotation cycles. You plant them quite fast, you can reap them quite fast, and they can be applied quite fast. So also from a carbon point of view, where speed and urgency is not irrelevant, it is quite relevant that we capture carbon as fast as possible and reduce it as fast as possible. It is a good strategy to follow, I think. And in France, they also have the RE 2020 that is also pushing for that. So I think it's really valuable also for farmers, as they can sell it directly on the market.
Should we move on to questions from the audience, if there are any? Yes, I'll move around with the mic. I checked the YouTube comments, but they are limited to audio quality and names of the panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much. Fabrizio from University of Pisa. I'm a PhD from the third year. Just a question about agroforestry. Do you consider, or are you considering agroforestry as a practice of regenerative agriculture in your system, in your project, or not? And what do you think about it? And moreover, what the farmer think about it? Thank you.
I think it's very depends on the system you're working with. Of course, agroforestry is levers for Regenag. It is very efficient to sequester carbon. But when we are talking about cereal farms that are 200 hectares and that are really in a productive system, right now our farmers are not ready for this, like planting trees inside the fields. I think it's very adapted, for example, when you have livestock or when you have permanent crops. But today in the industry, like working with cereal farmers, we're not there yet. But planting hedges, this is something that we are actually really trying to implement. But it also depends on the territory. For example, in the west of France, they have a lot of hedges still, so it's easier to try to talk about this with farmers. In the northeast of France, there is no trees in the field, so when you start saying that you will put hedges everywhere, it's a more complicated discussion to have.
Yeah, I fully agree, and that depends on the crops and the region you are working in, because, I don't know, we have coffee projects in Nicaragua, everything is already under agroforestry, basically, so you have to keep it and you have to improve it. But yeah, as you mentioned, for most of the European arable crop systems, that's very complicated, that's a strong shift, and what's complicated with landscape infrastructure is that also you don't see very quick the benefits. The benefits are very important, but basically you say to the farmer, okay, you'll have to manage fields differently, the plots will be smaller, you have to adapt a bit the machinery, what you will be doing, that will cost some money, and maybe you will have microclimatic benefits or pest pressure reduction benefits in 15 years or something like that. Sometimes that's hard to convince, and doesn't mean that in some project that's not the case, but just that's more, in my view, the national policies and European policies have a very important role to play in that, because that's more middle and long-term view in terms of project, and generally in terms of deployment of regenerative agriculture, that comes in the second time, most of the time. So we basically first work on tillage, cover crop, biomass restitution, and so on, and then start leveraging the topic of biodiversity infrastructure in a second time when the projects start to be mature also on these topics.
Lucas, is it fair to say that for the case of agroforestry, the carbon sequestration is indeed the key objective and not so much any co-benefits?
Yeah, again, that's a key objective for public organizations and corporates. But like, never a farmer is planting an hedgerow and saying, I will store carbon, and I invested thousands of euros into that. I mean, that happens, but that's really not the majority of the farmers and of the people. So at the end of the day, the benefits are microclimatic benefits, pest pressure reduction benefits, environmental benefits in general, that must be connected to daily farming activities, but carbon is rarely the main driver for a farmer to implement these kind of infrastructures.
My name is Zaur from BAT Agra from Germany. I have a question about the humidified carbon you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. As we know, the stability of carbon is very essential, also in terms of CRCF regulation. So I think it's a very good idea at the beginning of such a project to calculate the humidified carbon. But how you can claim about the results if your partners, companies, agree with that? Can they claim? Because as we know, humidified carbon is very easily decomposable. So after 1 year, they will decompose and will use as an energy source for the bacteria in the soil. And do you plan to switch in the coming years from humidified carbon to the stable soil organic carbon based on CRCF regulation? Thank you very much.
So yeah, it's an interesting point. I presented the indicators that we are challenging our farmers upon. So we decided that they will be remunerated on things that they can act upon. But we are actually calculating the carbon storage using the AMG Simeos model. So we are able, with all the data that we have, to calculate carbon storage as in the CRCF, and we are also able to share with our clients this factor of carbon storage. It's just that we don't pay our farmers depending on the amount of carbon they store, but the amount of carbon they bring back to the soil, which is different.
So if, Stefan, from the company Secana from Germany, if we say that actually these corporates care about carbon and carbon in the soils, can't we bridge from carbon in the soils to these more meaningful indicators for farmers, for example, yield stability, or maybe even yield increase, fertilizer use reduction? Isn't that maybe a challenge that, if solvable, we can kind of put everything under one roof? We can measure carbon at the same time, quantify the benefits that maybe other stakeholders in the value chain have.
I think we talk a lot about carbon as something we should sequestrate in soils. We should also not forget that carbon is a flux, and that's basically the energy that is present in a soil. And for a farmer, the direct way of conceiving this energy, that's organic matter, basically. And if I summarize briefly, but organic matter is like the higher you have it, the higher water you can have, higher water retention you can have in the soil, the higher nutrient density you can have in the soil, the higher biological activity you can have in the soil, and so on. But that's also a flux. And about this claim, as we both have also some more in-setting, in-value chain projects, the CRCF and the way to assess the carbon sequestration right now on carbon credit management is not exactly the way it's done most of the time in value chain. And I think the next deadline for this corporate in value chain will be, in my view, at least the Green Claim Directive that will be coming in the next months, which will basically say to the corporates that if you want to communicate on anything you do on your supply chain, you'll have to prove it, and that will increase the need of precision in terms of methodology and so on. But I see right now still CRCF and the in-setting approach as sometimes two really parallel approaches, which are not always very communicating to one another, basically.
Hi, Gerdus van der Laarste from Metabolic. I just have a question, because it came up that you also need a lot of times an upfront capital investment to go to regenerative practices, not just the operational cost. And I was wondering if you can expand a bit more beyond just value chain financing. What other types of financing have you looked at? Are there some challenges that you experience with getting loans, for example, or other types of finance?
Yeah, so as I said, the program is mostly financed by the clients and the downstream actors themselves. But we obviously looked at all the possibilities. I think the major challenge is to make sure that we secure a long-term financing. When we are talking with players that are sourcing their crops, like the things that they need to do their business in their value chain, it's easier to engage with long-term contracts and make sure that we have stable finance across the years. Because to start the program, we relied also on 10% of subsidies, European and French subsidies, just to be able to have all this data hub properly made, and also hire new people in the team, because what industrial don't see most of the time is that to run a program like this, you really need a lot of people and competent people that, for example, in most of the cases, farmers cooperative don't have, because they don't need an engineer in data and stuff like this. So you need to staff for that, and relying on public subsidies to start is a good way, but then to secure a long-term financing, I think it will come mostly from the private sector.
And yeah, I see also the public financing as a way to, again, catalyze maybe some projects. We have some projects, for example, with EIT-Food on multi-stakeholders project. So basically, EIT-Food is bringing several corporates around the table. These corporates agree also on working on specific supply chain. So I'm thinking about a project we have in Poland with several companies, actually. And here, EIT-Food is a financial support, but also a way to ease and enhance this kind of multi-stakeholders approaches. So I really see the public financing as like the same logic, in my opinion, as incentives. That's way to sparkle some initiatives and so on, and to support also companies and structures that are going towards this direction. But I think the main implementation will anyway be done by the private sector most of the time, in my view.
Hi, my name is Darrell Leroux. I work for the FNSEA, which is the main farmers organization in France. We feel like there is a paradox, because you said that carbon was the main driver for industrial and downstream companies to invest in this kind of programs. But at the same time, we know that we'll need to have someone to pay for it at the end, and we know that those companies don't have like infinite margins. They are in competition with other companies as well, and at the end it's the consumer who will have to pay at some point. But today what we feel like is that consumers are not really interested into carbon. They are not aware of this kind. They're more like interested in organic farming, for example, which is different. So do you think that on the long term, or even in the near future, and are you working on that to create this demand from the consumers, and do you think that carbon could become one of the drivers for the consumer's point of view, or will it be integrated in more broad systems such as regenerative agriculture? Because our fear is that at some point, we want to keep the money flowing into farms and not this kind of programs becoming mandatory in like 5 years or 10 years. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, that's a question we all have to know, like try to define who needs to pay the premium. What we see from the moment, so we are discussing with different actors across the value chain. What we see is that it's quite difficult for our clients to replicate like the cost to their clients and then to their clients. So at the moment we are working 2 steps of the transformation. Most of our clients are directly sourcing from us and then their clients. Going all the way to the consumer, I think it's the end goal, but I'm not sure it's our mission to do so. I think it's more something that needs to be considered through public policies, because right now I think even increasing the price of 1 cent to baguette is not possible for certain companies. So I think this is more like a political debate to define who needs to pay the premiums. At the moment, we work mostly with our clients and their clients, but going all the way to the consumer, as you said, they don't care a lot about carbon. Even if you have a nice label that you stamp on the packaging, people are not ready to pay more for that. So I think it should be addressed more in a political and policy level than just our kind of Regenag programs. Maybe try to make more marketing around Regenag, but at the moment I don't think it's our role to do so.
Can I add 2 things on that? I think the first point that you make is interesting because for me, I think it's not just the companies that have to commit to buying certificates, but also the federations of certain companies. For example, it may be more interesting to talk to the federation of insurance companies than to 1 or 2 insurance companies, because some insurance companies will say, if we buy the certificates and there's risk mitigation of flooding and stuff, we pay for it, but our competitors also profit from it. So there's a free rider problem there. And in that sense, it may be better to talk with the federations that they have a kind of aggregated offer that they say like, yeah, we want everybody in our federation to buy certificates proportionately to your market share or to your profits or whatever, something, a kind of key to do with it. And in that sense, I think you could, catalyze this demand effectively without somebody in that sector feeling like, yeah, we are the stupid ones who are investing it and all the others are profiting from it.
Okay, so we arrived at the top of the hour. Any famous last words? All good? Then I would like to thank my co-panelists and everyone in the audience for participating. Then also Project Team Credible and Climate Kick, even though nobody's here, I think, but thanks for organizing. And enjoy lunch. Thank you very much.